Hi, it's Future from Sewmate. If you want to see how I make this beautiful midi wrap dress with puff sleeves, please stay tuned. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do. I post new videos each week. Make sure to turn on your notification bell so that each time I upload new videos, you get notified first. You will need a basic bodice block to do this. I've got a tutorial on this channel on how you can make one. I'll leave a link in the description below. Leave yourself some space beyond the center front so that you can be able to draft your wrap over for the wrap dress. So first we're going to trace around the block as usual, making sure to mark all the notches and the dots. Lift your block. Lengthen your dress to your desired length. I'm using 40 centimeters. Square a line down and square a line across, and square another line down from the hip line. Now I'm adding the hem allowance of 4 centimeters. Draw in your dots. Square in your waistline. Coming to the waistline on the side seam there, come in by 1.5 centimeters, which is the seam allowance on our block. And we're also going to deduct the dart allowance, which is 3 centimeters, put a mark. Now we're going to measure the rest of the waistline, and from that amount we're going to subtract 5 centimeters. So this is the amount we're going to extend for our wrap, which is actual waist measurement minus 5 centimeters. Now coming to the waistline, extend by that amount and square up by 5 centimeters like I've just done there. So for mine I extended by 20 centimeters. Extend 20 centimeters all the way and draw a straight line like I'm doing here. Extend all the lines across to the new center front line. Lower the neckline by 13 centimeters and widen the neckline by 3 centimeters and square a line down. With your curved ruler, connect these 3 points like I'm doing here, making sure to square at the center front and the shoulder. Now lower this point by 0.5 centimeters and connect with a straight line to the shoulder tip. This will help to prevent gaping at the neckline. So this part is not going to be included. Now I'm adding my seam allowance for the neckline, which is 1 centimeter. Make sure to add the 1 centimeter all the way through the center front as well, like I've just done here. Now I'm using my red marker to draw in my facing, which is 7 centimeters all the way down, following through the last line we just drawn for the seam allowance. So just measure along 7 centimeters all the way down like I'm doing here. With your curved ruler, make a nice curve here. Then we're going to adjust for our puffed sleeves. Come in by 1.5 centimeters and square a little line down. Now connect this curve to the underarm like I'm doing here. So we came in by 1.5 centimeters, so this whole part is not going to be included. Now I'm marking the all punches for our dart points. And adding the grain line to the pattern parallel to the center front. Now adding notches to the pattern and smoothing the curve there, the hip line with the curved ruler. Now labeling the pattern, front dress, cut 1 pair, and I put my initial. Now we're going to be tracing our front facing, so just get a fresh pattern paper and put it under your pattern. With your tracing wheel, we're going to trace around the whole facing like I'm doing here. Lift your pattern and put that one aside so that we can work on the facing part. Just outlining the tracing wheel marks there. You may not need to do this part, you can just cut straight away. Now adding the grain line to the pattern piece and labeling the pattern. Front facing, cut one pair plus one pair fusing, and I put my initial. Cut around the pattern. Our front facing is finished. Now we're moving on to cutting the main pattern as well. Cut around your pattern like I'm doing here. Our front patterns are finished. Now we're moving on to making the back. Trace around your back block like we done with the front, making sure to mark the notches and the dots. Lift your block, lengthen your dress to your desired length. I'm using 40 centimeters like we did with the front. Square a line across and square another line down from the hip line. Now adding the hem allowance 4 centimeters. Draw in your dots. Square in your waistline. So this is our center back. Now widen the neckline by 3 centimeters like we've done with the front and square a line down. And lower the center back neckline by 2 centimeters and square another line across. With a curved ruler, draw a nice curve. Now I'm adding the seam allowance, which is 1 centimeter all around. And smoothing everything with a curved ruler. From the seam allowance, we've just drawn, go down 11 centimeters and square a line down. And on the other end of the shoulder, from the seam allowance again, go out 7 centimeters and square a line down. Just lengthening these lines across. Now with your curved ruler, join these two to form a nice curve for our facing. Now adjust for your puff sleeve again, come in by 1.5 centimeters like we've done with the front, and just join the new curve to the underarm there like I've done here. So this part is not going to be included in our pattern. Now I'm just transferring the notches across to the new armhole. Coming to the center back at the waistline, come in by 2.5 centimeters and join it back to the center back line at the top there. Now mark a point parallel to the end of the dart and connect it back to the waistline. So we went in 2.5 centimeters and our dart allowance is 3 centimeters. So we're going to deduct 2.5 from 3 and we're left with 0.5. So we're going to come in from the side seam and take out 0.5 centimeters like I'm doing here, which means we are left with no dart for the back pattern. So we're crossing out the dart, we don't need it for this pattern. We've taken the 0.5 at the side seam and 2.5 at the center back seam. Now I'm adding notches to the pattern. And labeling the pattern, back dress, cut one pair, and I put my initial. Now I'm adding the grain line to the pattern, parallel to the center back. Next, we're going to trace around the facing for the back. Using the tracing wheel, like I'm doing here. Lift your pattern, remove your main pattern and just cut around the facing like I'm doing here. Now you've got two options, whether to trim off the seam allowance at the center back and cut one piece on fold, or to leave it as is and cut one pair like I'm doing here, and one pair fusing as well. And I'm putting my initial. Now cut around the main pattern. And our back patterns are finished. Now we're moving on to making our waist ties. So you need a fold and pattern piece. Now draw a rectangle that's 5 by 60 centimeters long. You can decide to make it shorter or longer, whichever way you prefer. Now I'm adding seam allowances right round, which is 1 centimeter, and cut around your pattern. Open your pattern piece and transfer all the lines across to the other side like I'm doing here. Now I'm adding notches to the pattern piece and drawing in my grain line in the middle of our pattern paper and labeling the pattern piece waist tie cut 4, and I put my initial. And our waist tie piece is finished. Now we're moving on to the sleeve. So for our sleeve pattern, we're going to use the puff sleeve pattern that we drafted in an earlier tutorial. I'll leave a link in the description below and a link above as well. All our pattern pieces are finished. Now we're moving on to sewing. Now moving on to making your dress. What you need are your completed patterns, your fabric and your usual cutting tools. So for the fabric, I'm going to be using this beautiful floral satin fabric. Okay, so now let's move on to cutting our fabrics. So all our pattern pieces are cut and ready to sew. So for this dress, we're going to be doing a few steps at a time so that we finish quickly. So the first step we're gonna do is to interface all the pieces that needs interfacing, which are the facings, the waist ties, and the sleeve cuffs. Okay, when we finish with that, we're going to take our front pieces and we're going to sew on our front darts. Okay, then from there we're gonna take both our back pieces and we're gonna lay them one on top of the other, right side facing. Match the center back seam and pin along it. Okay, so we'll take this to the sewing machine and sew along the center back seam with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Let's do all those steps together. Okay, so we have managed to interface all our pattern pieces that need interfacing, and we've sewn the center back seam nicely and overlocked it, and I pressed everything nicely to the sides. And for the front pieces, we've sewn on the darts and we've pressed everything down nicely as well. Okay, next take your facing pieces. So we're going to join them at the top here at the shoulder seam. Join the center back seam as well and pin along. And we're going to join the other shoulder seam as well. So now we've got a very long facing piece. So what we're going to do is to go to the sewing machine and we're going to start with joining these seams with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. When we finish that, turn your facing piece to the right side, and what we're going to do now is to take this to the overlocker as well and just overlock the outer edge all the way around to the other side. Whilst we're there, we're going to take our waist tie pieces, the 4 pieces we cut, we're going to fold it back right sides facing, and we're going to pin along the edges. Now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew from the fold line to the corner, pivot the fabric and finish off this other raw edge. We have to leave one end open so that we'll be able to turn our tie to the right side. Okay, so we'll do that with all the 4 pieces. So let's go and do these 2 things. Okay, now so we've sewn our facing pieces together. Now we've got one very long facing piece and we managed to overlock the outer edge as well. So we're gonna put this on the side for now, and we also sewn our 4 waist tie pieces. So what we're going to do now is to clip the corners and turn them all to the right side. Okay, so now we're going to take our waist tie pieces and iron them nice and flat. Okay, let's do that. Okay, now so we finished ironing our waist tie pieces. So now take your 2 front dress pieces, lay them on the table with the right side up. This is so that we can be able to put our first 2 tie pieces. At least we won't get too confused. So now with our 2 front dress pieces facing up, I'm going to be wearing my dress with the right side on top of the left one. So what I'm going to do is to take one tie piece and I'll just locate my notch for the waistline here, and I'm just gonna go above the waistline and pin my waist tie to the side seam like I'm doing here. That's for the left side. Then for the right side, the waist tie piece is going to be on the side seam but inside the dress, not outside. So we're going to put our waist tie inside like this, above the notch as well. and just pin it along. Now we're going to take our back piece and put it on top of the front pieces and just match the shoulder seams and the side seams and pin everything along. Okay, so now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and sew along the shoulder seams and the side seams and overlock everything. Let's do that. Okay, now so we've sewn our side seams and overlocked them. At the same time sewing on our waist ties. One for the outside and the other one for inside the dress. Both on the side seams. Now we're going to turn our dress to the right side and we're going to position the other two ties that are left. So just here on the overlap, look for the notch and just align your waist tie piece there. Just pin it down. Go to the other side and do the same on the overlap. Now we're going to take our facing piece and we're going to attach it to the edge of our dress from one side to the other, right side to right side like this. So we're just going to pin it along all the way from one end to the other. Let's do that. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew from one end to the other. Let's do that. Okay, now so I've managed to sew on the whole facing piece. Okay, right round. So the next thing we're going to do is to understitch this whole seam again. So what you're gonna do is to just lay the facing on top of the seam allowance like this and just understitch the whole way right round. Let's do that. Okay, now so we finished attaching the facing to the dress and we did a bit of understitching there. And also the other thing, we're going to hem our dress, so just overlock the whole hem. Okay, when we finish with that, you're going to hold at the hem, hold the facing and roll it on top of the seam like this. So our hem allowance is 4 centimeters and you're just going to stitch 4 centimeter wide hem allowance from the seam here up to the end of the overlocking. Okay, we'll do that for both sides and then I'll tell you the next step. Okay, so that's done. I've attached the facings to the dress using the stitching method, and also I overlocked the whole hem and I've managed to sew the 4 centimeters here. So what we're gonna do next is to get your scissors. We're just gonna cut about 1 centimeter here and just cut a little bit there to remove a bit of the bulk. We do the same on the other side. Now we're going to turn this to the right side like this. Make sure you've got a nice corner like that. We do same on this side too. And now we're going to take this to our ironing board, and we're going to iron down our hem allowance of 4 centimeters, and then we're going to finish it off with a blind hem stitch. Let's do that. Okay, now so we finished with hemming our dress. We did a blind hem all around. So that's it. So I'm gonna put the dress on the side, and then we're gonna start with the sleeves. So now for the sleeves, we're going to gather both the sleeve head and the sleeve hem. So what we're going to do is to go and sew 2 rows of stitching, both at the top from notch to notch, and at the bottom from notch to notch again 2 rows of stitching with the longest stitch on your sewing machine, which is the gathering stitch. Make sure to leave some long threads hanging at the edges so that we'll be able to gather this at the end. Make sure all your 2 rows of stitching are within your seam allowance, okay? So let's go and do all that. So to the sleeves now, we've sewn 2 rows of stitching both to the sleeve head and to the sleeve hem here. Next, get your sleeve pattern and your sleeve band. So we're going to gather the bottom part to match with the top of our sleeve band here, okay? So let's do that. So we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew along this seam here with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. When we finish with that, we're going to open our sleeve like this, and then we're going to fold it halfway, right side facing like this, and we're going to sew along this underarm seam to the edge with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance for both sleeves. Let's do that. Okay, so we finished sewing our sleeve to the armband, and we've also finished off our underarm seam and overlocked it nicely. Okay, so the next thing is to take our sleeve to the iron and iron this seam facing upwards, so that by the end of this, when we fold our sleeve band up like this, we're going to be able to cover that seam into the sleeve band. So at the same time, whilst we add the iron, we're going to iron our sleeve band into position so that we iron it halfway, and then we iron our 1 centimeter seam allowance under, making sure to cover this seam, okay, like this, right round. Let's do that to both sleeves. So I finished ironing my sleeve like I told you, and I also went ahead and pinned everything down nicely. So I'm just gonna go to the sewing machine and sew from the right side with an edge stitching right round, making sure that I'm catching everything from behind here. And I'll also do another edge stitching at the other edge here. This is optional, you can do it or not, it's up to you. So I'm gonna do that to both sleeves. Let's do that now. Okay, now so we've sewn on our sleeve bands and they're nice and neat inside and out. Beautiful. Now we're going to go ahead and gather the sleeve head to fit with the armhole of our dress. Now we're going to take our dress and we're going to lay it down with the wrong side facing up. So we take our sleeve with the right side facing up like this, and we're going to make sure that we've got the right sleeve for the armhole. Next, you're gonna get your sleeve and you're going to insert it through the right side of the dress through the armhole like I'm doing here. So first you've got to make your notches so that to make sure you've got the right sleeve for the armhole, Make sure that you spread your gathering evenly along the armhole. Now do the same to the other armhole as well. So now we're going to take this to the sewing machine and sew along the armhole with a 1 centimeter seam allowance and overlock both sides. Let's do that. Okay, now so we finished sewing on our sleeves nicely and overlocked everything, and it's looking nice and neat. And our dress is finished, and I'm happy with it too. Thank you.